welcome to my channel. My name is Mikal and I am a self-taught film photographer based in New York City. And in today's video, I'm going to be talking about my first personal photo project entitled Habesha. So before we even get into the video, I'm going to define what Habesha means to folks. I asked my coworker the other day, do you know what Habesha means? And she told me, I know what Habibi means. So for those of you who are new to the term, the word Habesha is used by both Eritreans and Ethiopians as a self-descriptor. Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia in 1991, so the countries have been divided since. It's been 30 plus years, but they have a rich shared cultural history dating back to the Kingdom of Aksum. So really to recognize the shared history, the shared cultural ties, and this unity between both countries, there is this word Habesha that is meant to dissolve any differences from this cross-border conflict and to recognize that these people come from the same origins. And today, if you look up Habesha on any social media outlets, you'll see a number of cultural videos, of meme videos of people joking about what it means to be a first-generation kid in the West, and just other things related to both Eritrean and Ethiopian identity and culture. That is like just a high-level overview of the word. I want to give some background on myself, me, the artist, why I'm starting this project, and then we can get into how this project is set up, my hopes for it, and the conversations that I hope to start from it. Essentially, I was raised on the West Coast until I was 8 years old, and there are a lot of Eritreans on the West Coast. I would say there's more there than the East Coast. So growing up, I was very much aware that I was Eritrean, and more than that, I was learning about my history and sharing and celebrating my culture. I was going to a lot of Independence Day events, a lot of festivals, a lot of just cultural events throughout my childhood that really instilled the sense of pride in my Eritrean identity. At 8 years old, I then moved from Seattle to the Washington, D.C. area. Silver Spring, Maryland, to be exact, is where I consider home. And I went from a very strong and large Eritrean community to Washington, D.C., where it is the largest Ethiopian diaspora in the world. And so while I am sure that I had met Ethiopians in my youth, I don't really have a recollection of meeting Ethiopians or talking to Ethiopians about my Eritrean identity. It was really only when I moved to the DC area that I met Ethiopians, and there was this tension with me calling myself Eritrean. And on TikTok, I gave the story of me going to the injera shop. Injera is like the base of most of our food. So me and my aunt were going to buy some food, and this guy at the shop starts speaking to me in Amharic, which is the national language of Ethiopia. And I tell him, look, I don't speak Amharic. This is such a common experience in the DMV for Eritreans. If you look at the TikTok, a lot of Eritreans were resonating with this experience. It is very common. But he was like, why don't you speak your own language? And I was like, well, I'm not Ethiopian, I'm Eritrean. And he got really, really mad at me. And this left such an impression on me at a young age because I was 8 years old, and here this old man was getting mad at me for calling myself Eritrean. My aunt told me it's just better to call yourself Habesha, basically to avoid any reactions like that in the future. But, you know, growing up on the West Coast and having this having this intrinsic pride in being Eritrean, I was like, why should I call myself Habesha? I'm Eritrean. But from that experience, I had this chip on my shoulder. I started identifying as Habesha in the DMV area. But I always was wondering, I was like, why do I have to use this term? This is so strange. Growing up, I started asking my family about this term because obviously I didn't ask my aunt in that moment about it. So I started asking my family more. My mom's family grew up in the capital of Eritrea, which is Asmara, and they were very much like, we are Eritrean. We do not call ourselves Habesha. We are Eritrean. You are Eritrean. Call yourself Eritrean. On the other hand, my dad's family grew up in Addis, which is the capital of Ethiopia. So they really had a different perspective. They were like, we grew up with Ethiopians. I even have Ethiopians intermarried into my dad's side of the family. So they're like, yeah, we're all Habesha. We all have this shared history. That doesn't mean that they're less prideful in their Eritrean identity. They definitely emphasize their Eritrean identity and teach me about my heritage and my history on my dad's side. But I think they're just more amicable to the term, and it makes sense because they grew up in Ethiopia. Listening to both of my families talk about their attachment to this word showed me that your relationship and your reaction to being called Habesha really depends on both your ethnic background as well as your lived experiences. I can't look at an Eritrean and assume they identify as Habesha, where similarly with Ethiopians, I learned that you cannot look at an Ethiopian and assume that they identify with this word. And that really came to the forefront in high school. And I think that's when this conversation really started solidifying in my head. I started seeing more Oromo people talking about how they do not identify as Habesha. And that really blew my mind because up until that point, I've had so many Ethiopians in the DMV area telling me, we're all the same, we're all Habesha. And now here is this group of Ethiopians, and not just any group, but the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia, saying that they do not identify with this word. So I was like, hold up, like what does this mean, and why is this, like how is this possible? Fast forward, I went to university and I studied international affairs focused on identity and governance in Africa. And for my senior capstone project, I researched US Eritrean relations. I was really interested in studying this specific relationship because really the only reason why Eritrea was annexed by Ethiopia was because of US support. To give folks a little rundown on Eritrean history, Eritrea was sold by Ethiopia to Italy in the late 1800s. I can't remember the exact year, but I'll put it here. It was the Treaty of Wuchale. And basically, that is what enabled Ethiopia to evade colonialism, as they sold off a part of their territory and they remained under occupation rather than as a colony. So Eritrea became an Italian colony, and unlike other African countries that traditionally gained independence from a European power, Eritrea was actually claimed by the UK as a proxy of World War II. So Eritrea was then under UK occupation, and the UK really didn't develop us in any way. It was more they were extracting resources for their colonies in the Middle East. And then at the end of World War II, basically there was this question of Eritrea that was brought to the United Nations. The United Nations was like, what do we do with this country? Do we divide it between the neighboring countries? Does it become an independent territory? Ethiopia very much wanted Eritrea in order to have access to the Red Sea. And at that time, the US was one of Ethiopia's biggest allies, and that played into their favor. So Eritrea became an autonomous region within Ethiopia. You can think of a relationship somewhat similar to the Vatican City in Italy. However, Emperor Haile Selassie annexed Eritrea, and this definitively started the Eritrean War for Independence, which lasted for 30 years. Following independence, there wasn't really a period of peace for quite some time. There was actually another war in the early 2000s, and it wasn't until 2018 that there was official peace between the state of Ethiopia and the state of Eritrea. And despite all of this, the people still had to grapple with what these new borders meant for their identity. I also want to pause here because I think that people often say, we should let go of identity politics, or why is Africa so focused on ethnic division? You can see examples of this with Catalonia in Spain. You can see Quebec in Canada. So I think that the topic of language and identity is actually quite a universal topic. I think that when you talk about the Habesha identity, it is very niche and it is very personal because, as I just said, we recently came out of war. The independence war was 30 plus years ago. There was a border war in the early 2000s. And then there was the war in Tigray that, there's still war ongoing in the region. So the topic of identity is very sensitive, and I recognize that. But I do want to emphasize that these types of conflicts are not specific to Africa and are not unique to the Eritrean and Ethiopian community. So, despite all of the conflict and strife in our region and between these two countries, the word Habesha has still very much been used as a tool for community building. If you search the word Habesha, you'll find a lot of communities and social media pages that show the similarities between our cultures and also provide different resources and services to people of both communities. But I really wanted to give this high-level overview of this word because both Eritreans and Ethiopians use it as a self-descriptor. It is very common in our lexicon, but it is a word that comes with so much weight. And that is the reason why I'm creating this project. I am not trying to say that we should or should not use the word. There is no conclusion on the usage of the word in this project. This project is simply meant to open up a conversation within my own community, the Eritrean and Ethiopian community. And then for folks outside of our community, this is really an opportunity to educate people on our region. I also do want to say that for myself as an artist, I am coming to this project through my own lens. I am an Eritrean American woman, so I am Eritrean, but I was born and raised in the diaspora. And I've also lived in so many different places. I've lived in 9 different countries. So I've created a community with different Eritreans and Ethiopians in all of those locations. I grew up, as I said, in the United States. I was raised on the West Coast until I was 8, and then Washington, D.C. area until I was 12. After that, I moved to Sri Lanka, where I actually became quite close with an Ethiopian family there. I went to high school in Germany. I studied abroad in Kenya and England. So throughout all of my travels, I have also seen how this word Habesha has helped me connect with other people, but also how sometimes it can be a cause for tension in establishing different relationships. So I come to this project through my own lens, but I understand that my lens is not the only lens. The point of this project is really to highlight numerous perspectives because I think that our community is so diverse and we deserve to showcase that diversity. I think that our culture is so rich and we can only truly appreciate it if we are educated on it. So with that, let's get into the project. This is a photo project in which I photographed and interviewed over 20 Ethiopians and Eritreans. I chose people from different ethnic backgrounds, different birthplaces, different age groups, different religions, because I really wanted this project to be as diverse as possible. So while this project highlights different participants, I'm really outlining 3 different layers to the conversation. The first layer is internal to our community, the second layer is within the larger African diaspora, and the third layer is more on the national and international level. So let's get into these layers and what they mean. Number 1, internal to the community. Anyone from Eritrea or Ethiopia knows the controversial feelings and statements that have been made around this word. And what I want this project to do is really bring folks together so that we can have this conversation openly and have respect for each other's viewpoints. If you look up what does it mean to be Habesha or what does Habesha mean, you will find so many different forms of media. You will find Reddit threads, you will even find TikToks. So talking about colorism and texturism, I really want folks to ask themselves, what does it mean to look Habesha? Next, I want to talk about the role of religion. When I first started this project, I was really coming from it from the nation state perspective as an Eritrean. But something that kept getting highlighted throughout the project was the religious undertone and the importance of the Orthodox Church. But I would love to invite Muslims to share their perspectives on the word and if they identify with the word. In my project, the Muslims that were interviewed all identified with the word, but on Reddit threads, I posted, are you Habesha on Reddit in the Ethiopia and Eritrea communities, and different Muslims expressed that they do not identify with the word, and I'm going to link those threads below. And 3 is, of course, the origin of why I started this project, the term, we are all the same. I think that was one of the most triggering phrases for me growing up, especially as an Eritrean in the DC area. And I definitely have evolved since then. I think, growing up, you centralize certain identities more than others. I think as an adult, the Eritrean identity is a part of me. It's not the only part of me. But the word Habesha can sometimes be used to erase other folks' identities. I feel like in the case for Eritreans, sometimes Ethiopians can use it to evade their discomfort at recognizing that there is in fact a difference between the Ethiopian and Eritrean identity just by virtue of being from 2 different countries. You will find Eritreans or Ethiopians like Oromo and Harari people who do identify as Habesha, but there's a significant number who don't. And so this again is not to say whether people should or should not. I think it's just to open the conversation. Beyond opening the conversation, it's reminding people to not tell people how to identify. This is really both a critique and a love letter to my community. I know a lot of people are going to be angry by what I'm saying, but I think emotional reactions just kind of prove the importance of this conversation. Why does the word Habesha get such a visceral reaction from folks? Let's talk about it and let's hold space for each other to speak openly and to receive each other with empathy and respect. So layer number 2, the Habesha identity as it relates to the African diaspora. The conversation around, are you Habesha or are you Black? The word Habesha is often used more in the diaspora than it is back in Eritrea and Ethiopia. Obviously, if you are surrounded by people from the same identity, you're probably going to be more likely to identify with your ethnic group or with your religion or with your city, your region. There are other ways to specify your identity when everyone around you is Habesha or Eritrean or Ethiopian. And I can only imagine how confusing it is for an immigrant to come to the United States and they grow up learning, their ethnic group, I'm Eritrean or I'm Ethiopian, and then they come to America and they tell you you're Black. And I'm not trying to discount the racism that can be in the Eritrean and Ethiopian communities. That's definitely a layer that needs to be discussed. Colorism is rampant among all communities, but I think it is important to recognize that, again, the language we use to describe ourselves is core to our identity. What does it do to someone's identity formation and identity evolution when they are then forced to adopt a label that they did not put on themselves? So it was really interesting looking at Dr. Emmanuel Isaac's research because he found the same thing in South Africa. He found Eritreans and Ethiopians were going to South Africa. They were saying they're Habesha, and everyone is like, oh, are you Black? Are you colored? And they're like, no, I'm Habesha. And everyone was very confused. Eritreans and Ethiopians really vary in skin tones, in textures, in features. And yet we all identify with this word Habesha, and that can be confusing for people. And I think that the conversation around Blackness is also really expanding. I actually lived in Swaziland in 2019 to 2020. Swaziland, or Eswatini, is a country that is primarily bordered by South Africa as well as Mozambique. And so I was visiting South Africa a lot. I was under the impression that anyone who was just mixed Black and white was colored. When I visited Cape Town, where there's a high concentration of colored people, I learned that this is a legitimate ethnic group and culture. You can't just be mixed Black and white. You have to be of the ethnic group, of the culture. But the colored identity reminded me of the Habesha identity because we all look very different, and some of us have different customs, and some of us are from different regions, but we all kind of unify under this word Habesha. I almost forgot the most important part when it comes to the conversation of the African diaspora: the exotification of East African women. Drake's Young East African Girl really changed everything, and often this includes Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia. And it creates this weird division with other East African nations, such as Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Tanzania. I think in this conversation as well, Eritrean and Ethiopian women are not innocent. I think that there is a way that I have seen Eritreans and Ethiopians play into this archetype that does lend itself to a sense of superiority. At the same time, I think it's important to call out other African men. And this is no shade at all to people who are in intercultural relationships, but I do think that this has been a prominent conversation on social media. And I think that at the same time that East African girls are exotified and can put themselves on a pedestal, I think sometimes people need to ask themselves as well, why are we putting these features on a pedestal? What is the root cause of that? Finally, the last layer of this project that I want to explore is the Habesha identity as it relates to the national and international identity of Black folks. And this is going to be with a concentration on North America because most of the participants that I'm interviewing are based in North America. Growing up in the DMV, I felt so holistically represented because I could identify as Black and Eritrean and no one questioned me on my identity. It's really only since becoming an adult and leaving the DMV area that people have told me that I don't look Black. And I think I felt so secure in my identity because I could see myself represented everywhere. I saw Giz in downtown Silver Spring. I could hit up the injera shop with my aunt. I could go to the festival at the convention center on an annual basis. And as our communities grow, so does our social, cultural, and political capital. If we look at Habesha superstars today, we have a significant influence on Black culture. I'm thinking about artists like The Weeknd or Nipsey Hussle. I'm thinking about entrepreneurs like Marcus Samuelson. I'm thinking about lawyers like Haben Girma. I'm thinking about technologists like Timnit Gebru. You know, being Habesha or being Eritrean or Ethiopian is really just one part of someone's identity. It does not dictate the rest of their identity or their interests. These individuals really inspire me because they are excelling at the top of their industries, but they have not forgotten their origins or their Habesha culture. It's something that they carry with them, and it's something that I believe, you know, it may not inform everything they do, but you know, looking at Nipsey Hussle, for example, he visited Eritrea at an older age. Looking at The Weeknd, he started Samra Origins, which is a coffee brand, kind of giving homage to his Ethiopian background. He also funded the Amharic language program, I believe, at the University of Toronto. I'm thinking of Timnit Gebru, who is regularly advocating on those experiencing the detriments of the conflict in Tigray. These are individuals really excelling at the top of their field, but still remain connected to their culture in the process. So I'm gonna wrap up the video here. When I think about the word Habesha, it is actually quite similar to words like Latinx, Desi, Arab, and it is a word that is really meant to describe a group of people with a shared cultural history. But I think that with the word Habesha, there has just been so many heavy conversations, and I think so many varied interactions with the word, that this project invites the community to not only express sentiments that they have around this word, but hopefully to gain more empathy and understanding for one another. If you made it to the end of this video, please leave a comment. For my Eritrean and Ethiopian folks, let me know, do you identify as Habesha? Why or why not? For all of my African diaspora folks, have you heard of the word Habesha before? What has your interaction with it been? And for everyone else, please just let me know your thoughts about this video and about your thoughts around language and identity. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.